Las Vegas has a dark side. Let's look at it.
On this episode of Greg's List, I'm checking out the dark stories of Las Vegas. Are you ready? Las Vegas. Just the name is doing a lot of work. Neon, money, the faint smell of regret and complimentary shrimp cocktail. It is a city engineered from the ground up to make you lose track of time, money, and occasionally your better judgment. And it is very, very good at its job. But there's a thing about a place built on illusions. Eventually you start wondering what's behind them. Because underneath those carefully synchronized fountain shows and the cheerful ding-ding-ding of machines designed by behavioral psychologists to keep you feeding them money, there is another Las Vegas. One that the tourist website skips entirely. A city soaked in blood, in mystery, in disasters so strange they read like bad fiction. A city where the mob didn't just visit, it built the place. Where murders went unsolved not because there were no leads, but because sometimes the people doing the investigating were the leads. You know the saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Great marketing, mostly untrue. Some of these stories refuse to stay buried. Some secrets have a habit of surfacing, like a body in the desert once the water table shifts, if there were water. There's no pretending otherwise. These are the dark stories of Sin City, the ones the casinos definitely do not want playing on the screens above the slot machines. And remember, one of these items is totally fake. See if you can guess it. I'll clue you in at the end of the episode. Number 8. Secrets of Lake Mead. Las Vegas doesn't just bury its secrets in history books. Sometimes it buries them underwater. Lake Mead sits on the Nevada-Arizona border, a reservoir so vast it supplies drinking water to roughly 25 million people across the American Southwest. It exists because of the Hoover Dam, one of the greatest engineering achievements in American history. A concrete wall holding back the Colorado River and, as it turns out, quite a bit more than water. Because when a brutal multi-year drought began shrinking the lake, dropping the water line by over 100 feet, the desert started giving things back. Human remains began appearing along the newly exposed shoreline. Then more. Then a barrel surfaced in the shallows. The kind of barrel you do not want to find a barrel's worth of things inside. And inside it were human bones. The victim had been shot. The body sealed and submerged, investigators believed, decades earlier. This was not a drowning accident. This was not a hiking tragedy. This was a filing system. Someone had used the bottom of Lake Mead as a place to store a problem, and they had been counting on it staying there. They were almost right. Here's where it gets surreal. When reporters asked former Las Vegas Mayor Oscar Goodman about the bodies emerging from Lake Mead, he did not express horror. He did not offer solemn condolences. He said, and I am quoting directly here, "It's not a bad place to dump a body." Now, Oscar Goodman was not just any mayor. Before he ran the city, he spent decades as a defense attorney, specifically as the defense attorney of choice for some of the most dangerous mob figures in American history. Mo Dalitz, Meyer Lansky, Tony Spilotro, these were his clients. He knew exactly what Lake Mead had been used for, in the same way a locksmith knows exactly how a lock gets picked. So when Oscar Goodman looks at a shrinking reservoir and his first thought is a good place to hide a body, that is not a gaffe. That is institutional memory. Las Vegas had been keeping those secrets for decades, sealed under hundreds of feet of water. The drought didn't create a mystery. It just canceled the storage arrangement. Number 7. Howard Hughes. In the late 1960s, one of the richest men on earth checked into the Desert Inn in Las Vegas and simply never left. His name was Howard Hughes, aviator, filmmaker, defense contractor, aerospace pioneer, a man who had personally broken airspeed records, built weapons systems for the United States government, and produced Hollywood films. At his peak, he was arguably the most accomplished and most powerful private citizen in America. And he spent the last years of his life in a blacked-out hotel room, not speaking to almost anyone, not leaving under almost any circumstances, conducting a business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars entirely through handwritten notes passed under a door. Hughes didn't just visit Las Vegas, he bought it. The Desert Inn, the Sands, the Frontier, the Castaways, the Silver Slipper. He accumulated casinos the way other men collect trading cards. At one point, he owned a significant portion of the entire strip. The Nevada Gaming Commission had to essentially invent new rules just to process how much of the state one man was purchasing. And he did it all from a single darkened room, in pajamas, without once sitting across a table from anyone he was buying from. Las Vegas has always attracted powerful men who want to own the place. Hughes was just the only one who did it while refusing to touch a doorknob. So what was Howard Hughes actually doing up there? His staff screened Ice Station Zebra, a 1968 Cold War submarine thriller. Not a masterpiece, but watchable, at his personal request more than 150 times. Not because he was studying it, not for any reason his aides could ever satisfactorily explain. He just needed to watch it, again and again and again. That was the manageable part. Hughes had developed a system for handling objects that required multiple layers of paper towels as a barrier between his skin and anything he might touch. Doorknobs, food containers, documents from his own company. Human contact of any kind was treated not as an inconvenience, but as a genuine biological threat. He wore tissue boxes on his feet. He communicated almost entirely through handwritten memos, sometimes dozens per day, rather than speak directly to the people working for him. And then there were the jars. Hughes collected his urine in labeled containers, organized and stored with the same methodical precision he had once applied to designing aircraft. This was not a medical necessity. This was a system. His system. The man who had personally piloted experimental planes, who had charmed Hollywood and terrorized Washington, had constructed a private world so sealed off from reality that the city he owned, one of the loudest, brightest, most aggressively stimulating places on Earth, was essentially wallpaper, somewhere below, irrelevant. He owned Las Vegas. He just couldn't touch it.
Number 6. The Pepcon Explosion.
On May 4th, 1988, a welder at the Pepcon chemical plant in Henderson made contact with something he should have not made contact with, and the Las Vegas Valley had one of the more extraordinary Wednesdays in its history. Pepcon, the Pacific Engineering and Production Company of Nevada, manufactured ammonium perchlorate, which is an oxidizer used in solid rocket fuel, including, at the time, the solid rocket boosters for the space shuttle. There was a great deal of it on site, stored in large quantities, because the Challenger disaster in 1986 had temporarily grounded the shuttle program and halted orders, leaving Pepcon with a significant backlog of extremely energetic material and nowhere to send it. A spark from a welding torch reached a storage tank. The resulting fire reached the rest. The explosion registered 3.5 on the Richter scale. Windows shattered miles away. The shockwave rolled across the entire valley. People in Las Vegas, 10 miles distant, felt it physically. A column of smoke rose over Henderson, visible from most of the metropolitan area. 2 workers were killed. More than 350 people were injured. A nearby Kid & Company marshmallow factory, and yes, that is a real thing that was really there, was also destroyed, which history has largely chosen to find grimly funny rather than dwell on. The site was essentially obliterated. It is now a light industrial park and auto mall. Pepcon, the company, relocated to Utah and eventually resumed production. The thing worth sitting with is this. Henderson in 1988 had a significant portion of America's rocket fuel oxidizer supply stored in a facility that a stray welding spark could detonate. That was the arrangement. That was considered acceptable industrial practice for a chemical plant located inside a major metropolitan area. Nobody had apparently stress-tested the scenario very hard.
Number 5. The Tupac Case.
On September 7th, 1996, Tupac Shakur attended the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. Tyson knocked Bruce Seldon down inside 40 seconds. It was that kind of night. Fast, electric, the whole city buzzing. A few hours later, at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Colville Lane, a white BMW pulled up alongside a black BMW carrying Tupac Shakur and Death Row Records founder Suge Knight. Whoever was in that car fired multiple rounds. Tupac was hit 4 times. Suge Knight, driving, was grazed by a bullet fragment. He kept driving. Tupac was 25 years old. He was rushed to University Medical Center and survived for 6 days before dying on September 13th. No one has ever been charged with the murder. Dozens of people were in the vicinity. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department investigated for years. Nobody has ever been charged. The theories have filled books, documentaries, and an entire sustained corner of the internet for 30 years. The LVMPD officially named a suspect in 2023, a man named Dwayne Keffy D. Davis, who was subsequently arrested and indicted. Davis had made statements over the years suggesting knowledge of the shooting. Whether a conviction follows remains, as of now, unresolved. For 27 years, the case gathered dust. Not for a lack of theories, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department maintained the case was open. Then, in 2023, something actually happened. Las Vegas Metro executed a search warrant. Evidence was seized, and a man named Dwayne Keith Davis, known as Keffy D, was arrested and indicted on murder charges. Davis was not an unknown figure in this story. He had spent years making public statements, including a memoir that strongly implied personal knowledge of what happened that night. He had described, in considerable detail, events that investigators found difficult to explain as anything other than participation. Whether a conviction follows is still unresolved. 27 years and going, still no clue as to what happened. That's not just a cold case. That's a statement. Just a reminder, I love having you here on Greg's List, and I would love it if you would subscribe if you haven't already, so you'll never miss another list in my attempt to make a list of every item on the planet. Also, if you go to gregslist.com, it'll take you right back to my main YouTube page, but that has links to my Patreon page and my Amazon wish list, and other things too. Anyway, let's get back to the list. Number 4. Hoover Dam. 30 miles from Las Vegas, straddling the Nevada-Arizona border, sits one of the most visited landmarks in the United States. Hoover Dam is an engineering marvel, 726 feet tall, holding back the Colorado River, generating enough electricity to power over 1 million homes. It was built during the Great Depression by workers desperate enough to take almost any job. Construction ran from 1931 to 1936. Officially, 96 workers died in industrial accidents, falling rock, blasting accidents, heavy equipment failures, and other hazards that were all too common on projects of that era. But the story begins before construction. On December 20th, 1922, surveyor J.G. Tierney drowned in the Colorado River while helping map the future dam site. He became the first person to die on the Hoover Dam project. 13 years later, on December 20th, his son Patrick Tierney drowned while working inside the dam's intake system. Same project, same date, father and son. Patrick is officially recorded as the last construction fatality. The official death toll of 96 is widely believed to be low. During the brutal summers, canyon temperatures exceeded 130 degrees on the tunnel floors. Workers who succumbed to extreme heat were often listed as having died from pneumonia, a classification that avoided compensation claims for their families. Hoover Dam remains one of America's greatest engineering achievements. It is absolutely worth seeing. It is also a reminder that history's greatest monuments were often built by people whose sacrifices don't always make it into the brochure. Number 3. Vegas runs dry. Thanks to AI, I was able to nab a news story from the future. On February 23, 2044, the Bureau of Reclamation issued a Level 0 shortage declaration for the Colorado River, a designation that had not previously existed because no one had seriously planned for what comes after the existing shortage tiers run out. Lake Mead sat at 4% capacity. The Hoover Dam's generators, which had run continuously since 1936, went offline. Las Vegas, for the first time in its history, experienced a complete municipal water failure. I should mention, this has not happened yet, but AI knows the future. But here is what has happened. Lake Mead has already dropped over 170 feet from its full capacity, Nevada, Arizona, and California have already been ordered to reduce their water draws, and the negotiations over who cuts how much have been, to put it diplomatically, not going well. Water scientists have been issuing increasingly direct warnings for over a decade. The 7 states that depend on the Colorado River use more water than the Colorado River actually produces. That is not a projection. That is the current situation. Las Vegas has invested significantly in water recycling infrastructure and is genuinely more efficient per capita than most American cities. It may manage this better than the apocalyptic version suggests. The article from the future goes on to say that some residents have sequestered themselves in walled compounds. Others formed roving bands of scavengers, while most have moved back east and only come back for Raider games. Number 2. The Ted Binion Mystery. Ted Binion was Las Vegas royalty. The son of legendary casino owner Benny Binion, he grew up around gambling and eventually took over operations at Binion's Horseshoe. But while his father was known as a larger-than-life casino operator, Ted developed a reputation for living on the edge. He loved gambling, collecting silver, and doing things his own way. One of Ted's passions was collecting precious metals. He accumulated what became known as the Binion Hoard, millions of dollars worth of silver bars, rare coins, and other valuables. Rather than trust a bank, he hid much of his collection in an underground vault on property he owned near Pahrump, about 60 miles west of Las Vegas. Apparently, he preferred Mother Nature as his safe deposit box. The Binion's family history already contained its own mysteries. Back in 1969, authorities uncovered an alleged plot by Marvin Weldon Shoemate to kidnap and murder Ted Binion. According to investigators, the scheme never got very far. Shortly after Benny learned about the alleged plot, Shoemate vanished without a trace. His disappearance has never been solved, becoming another enduring piece of Las Vegas folklore. Then, in 1998, Ted Binion himself was found dead inside his Las Vegas home. Toxicology reports showed multiple drugs in his system, including heroin. At first glance, it looked like an overdose, but detectives weren't convinced. The circumstances surrounding his death raised enough questions that police began treating the case as a possible homicide. Suspicion quickly turned to Ted's girlfriend, Sandy Murphy, and her new companion, Rick Tavish. The pair were charged, convicted of murder, and sentenced to prison. But the story took yet another twist. Their convictions were overturned, and after a second trial, both were acquitted of murder. Legally, neither was responsible for Ted Binion's death. Shortly after Ted died, Rick Tavish was caught in the Nevada desert trying to dig up the buried Binion silver hoard near Pahrump. Whether Ted died of an overdose, was murdered, or something in between remains a subject of debate. Ted Binion's death remains one of the most fascinating and controversial mysteries in Las Vegas history. Number 1. The MGM Grand Fire. On the morning of November 21st, 1980, a fire started in a deli. Not in the casino, not in the fuel lines, in a wall behind a restaurant on the ground floor of the MGM Grand Hotel. A faulty electrical connection that had probably been smoldering for hours before anyone noticed. By the time anyone did, it didn't matter. The casino floor was essentially a wind tunnel lined with carpet, synthetic materials, and decades worth of decisions made by people who had decided sprinkler systems were an unnecessary expense. The fire crossed the casino in minutes. The smoke went everywhere else. 85 people died. Most of them never saw flames. They died in their rooms, in stairwells, on upper floors, overcome by the toxic smoke that traveled faster and further than the fire itself ever reached. More than 700 others were injured. Helicopters pulled survivors off window ledges while the building still burned beneath them. Images so surreal that even Las Vegas, a city professionally committed to unreality, had no framework for them. The MGM Grand was not a neglected building. It was one of the most famous hotels in the world. It was also, like most large American hotels in 1980, almost entirely without sprinklers. That was legal, that was normal, that was the standard. The fire didn't just kill 85 people. It ended the argument about whether sprinkler systems were optional. Nevada passed mandatory sprinkler legislation within a year. Federal standards followed. 85 people. That's what it cost to settle the question. The MGM Grand did not vanish after the fire. Companies rarely do. It rebuilt, it rebranded, it expanded. The MGM name now sits atop one of the largest and most profitable hotel complexes on Earth, a gleaming property at the south end of the Strip that has hosted championship fights, A-list residencies, and millions of guests who have never heard of November 21st, 1980. In the fire's aftermath, Nevada rewrote its fire codes. High-rise hotels were required to install sprinklers, evacuation protocols were overhauled, the changes were real, and they were significant, and they have helped save lives in the decades since. They were also changes the industry had been lobbying against for years before the fire made an argument for them. The cost of installing it was the sticking point, weighed against a catastrophic outcome that the people making the calculation had decided was unlikely enough to ignore. 85 people made it likely. The MGM Grand tragedy is a case study in the price of doing things right versus the price of doing things cheap. Whether or not Las Vegas has learned this lesson is up for debate. I hope you enjoyed the list. Did you spot the fake? It was kind of easy because it was set in the future. It was the one about water drying out completely. And trust me when I say this one's not going to be fake for long. Anyway, our goodbye song for this episode is called Fremont Street, which is from the band Kissin Tell, singing about old Las Vegas, which is always new again. Anyway, hope you enjoy it. Cheers, everybody.
Boom, boom, chicka wow wow. Boom, boom, chicka wow wow. Yeah, neon raining down like glitter in the heat. Cheap shots, cheap thrills, dancing in the street. Everybody's loud, but the night's our friend. We're just getting started. Do it again. Got that full-blood fever. Let it rise. Hearts going wild under flashing skies. If the strip's too pricey, we don't care. Fremont's the place where the fun's on fair. Everywhere. Where we going tonight? Fremont Street. What we drinking tonight? Make it cheap. Who's dancing with us? Everybody. What's the rule of the night? Don't tell nobody. Fremont fever, turn it up, turn it loose under neon thunder. We got nothing to prove. From the zipline scream to the dive bar beat, we catch Fremont fever on Fremont Street. Cowboy.
Greg's List is a Guano production.